It is the winter of 1703, and tonight, Edo is colder than usual. Snow drifts quietly through the narrow streets, settling over roof tiles, wooden gates, and silent courtyards. The city is asleep, or at least pretending to be. Behind paper walls and shuttered windows, fires have burned low. Merchants, servants, guards, and noble households have all surrendered to the stillness of the hour. But not everyone is sleeping. Tonight, 47 men are awake. And if you use these stories to fall asleep, you might want to settle in now. Adjust your pillow, pull the blanket a little closer, and let the world outside fade for a while. And if you enjoy slow, immersive history told like a journey, feel free to like the video and subscribe to The Sleeping Historian. Now, let us step softly into old Japan. You are standing in the snow just before midnight. Your straw sandals are damp with melting frost, and the cold has long since pushed through the fabric around your feet. The men beside you say, "Almost nothing." Their faces are shadowed beneath straw hats and dark cloaks, their hands hidden, their breathing controlled. No one wants to waste warmth. No one wants to waste words. You already know what waits before dawn. This is not a patrol. This is not a warning. And this is not a mission anyone expects to survive unchanged. Ahead of you stands the mansion of a powerful man, high-walled and heavily guarded, the home of Lord Kira Yoshinaka. Behind those walls lies the ending of a story that began nearly 2 years ago with humiliation, blood, and a command no samurai could ever truly forget. The men around you were once retainers of Lord Asano Naganori of Akō. Once, they had status, income, armor with purpose, a master to serve, a place in the world. Now they are Ronin, masterless samurai, a dangerous thing in Tokugawa Japan. A samurai without a lord was not simply unemployed. He was spiritually unanchored, socially diminished, and politically suspicious. The peace of the Tokugawa shogunate had lasted long enough that war itself had become rare. There were fewer battlefields now, fewer chances to prove loyalty with steel. Instead, honor survived in ritual, discipline, and obedience. A samurai's identity depended on service, and when service vanished, what remained could become unbearable. The city around you does not know it yet, but by sunrise, these 47 men will become the most famous samurai in Japanese history. Not because they won a war, not because they conquered land, but because they chose not to forget. And to understand why they are here tonight, standing in silence beneath falling snow, you have to return to the spring of 1701. Back to a polished corridor inside Edo Castle. Back to a place where no sword should ever have been drawn. And yet, one was. It is the morning of April 21st, 1701. Spring has reached Edo, and the city is softer now than it will be on the snowy night that waits ahead. The plum blossoms have begun to fade, and the roads into the shogun's capital are crowded with officials, retainers, and messengers in formal dress. At the center of it all stands Edo Castle, massive, orderly, and quiet, in the way only places of absolute authority can be quiet. This is not just a residence. It is the beating administrative heart of Tokugawa Japan, where hierarchy is everything and etiquette is not decoration but law. Every step matters here. Every bow has weight. Every glance can be interpreted. To embarrass yourself in such a place is dangerous. To lose control is catastrophic. And on this morning, Lord Asano Naganori is trying very hard not to do either. He is young by the standards of power, the daimyo of Akō domain, and he has been assigned an important ceremonial duty, helping receive imperial envoys. It is an honor, but also a test. Court ritual in Edo is intricate, exhausting, and full of invisible traps. For guidance, Asano and another lord have been placed under the instruction of a senior court official named Kira Yoshinaka. Kira is experienced, well-connected, and by many accounts deeply unpleasant. Even now, standing in these polished halls, you can feel the imbalance between the two men. Asano is expected to learn, obey, and endure. Kira expects deference and, some whisper, expensive gifts. There are rumors even then that he has been insulting, dismissive, and deliberately humiliating toward Asano for weeks. No one knows every word that passed between them. History almost never gives us the full conversation before a disaster. But everyone remembers what happened next. The corridor is bright with daylight reflected from pale walls and lacquered wood. Sandals whisper against the floor. Robes rustle. Servants move carefully along the edges of the room. And then, all at once, the atmosphere tears open. Asano draws his short sword. Inside Edo Castle. Inside a place where violence is almost unthinkable. There is shouting, confusion, movement, the sudden scrape of panic against order. Asano lunges at Kira and slashes him, wounding him but not killing him. Blood marks the corridor. Officials recoil. Guards rush forward. The entire world of ritual and discipline collapses in a single forbidden act. In that instant, Asano has doomed himself. Because in Tokugawa Japan, the gravest crime is not hatred, not insult, not even revenge. It is disorder. And no matter what Kira may have said or done, Asano has committed violence in the shogun's castle, which means that by the end of the day, his fate will already be sealed, and with it, the fate of every man who once served him. By afternoon, Lord Asano Naganori is already a condemned man. There will be no long investigation, no dramatic defense, no slow appeal moving through layers of authority. In the world of the Tokugawa shogunate, judgment can arrive with terrifying speed, especially when the peace of the realm has been disturbed inside the walls of power itself. Asano is ordered to commit seppuku, formal ritual suicide. It is, in one sense, an honor. A samurai of rank is allowed to die by his own hand, rather than as a common criminal. But honor does not make the sentence lighter. It only makes it quieter. And so, while the city continues almost normally outside, while merchants still open shutters and servants still carry water through the streets of Edo, Lord Asano is taken to a residence where he will die before the sun fully leaves the sky. You can almost feel the strange stillness of that room. Tatami mats. A low arrangement prepared with terrible efficiency. Witnesses who understand exactly what this means. And one man, only hours removed from a burst of fury, now forced into absolute composure. There is something deeply unsettling about how quickly a life can be folded shut by a ritual. One moment, you are a daimyo with land, retainers, obligations and future. The next, you are expected to kneel, compose yourself, and disappear with dignity. Asano writes his death poem, a final act of control, a final shape given to a life that has already slipped beyond recovery. Then, as required, he opens his abdomen and is swiftly finished by his second. It is over with the kind of solemn efficiency that history often gives to violence once it has been wrapped in ceremony. He is 34 years old, and almost immediately the punishment extends beyond him. His lands are confiscated, his household is dismantled, his family line is disgraced, and his retainers, the men who had served him and built their lives around his position, are cast out into uncertainty. Overnight, they become Ronin, masterless, unmoored. For some, this means poverty. For others, humiliation. For all of them, it means a fracture in identity that cannot be easily repaired. Among those men is Ōishi Kuranosuke, Asano's chief retainer. If anyone might be expected to act immediately, it is him. If anyone might be expected to gather the men, sharpen the swords, and answer dishonor with blood, it is Ōishi. But he does not yet. And to many who watch from a distance, what happens next looks less like loyalty than surrender. Because while Lord Asano is buried, and while whispers spread through samurai circles about injustice and insult, Ōishi does something unexpected. He waits. And in a culture where waiting can look exactly like weakness, that choice will become the most dangerous part of the entire story. If revenge was simple, the story would have ended quickly. A handful of furious retainers would have rushed Lord Kira's residence in the days after Asano's death, died beneath the blades of his guards, and been remembered only as reckless fools overcome by grief. But Ōishi Kuranosuke understands something far more difficult than anger. He understands patience. And patience, in stories like this, is often mistaken for surrender. Back in Akō, the castle is being emptied. Storehouses are inventoried. Armor is collected. Records are sealed. Servants and officers drift through the corridors of a collapsing household, each one trying to understand what remains when the center has vanished. The castle itself still stands, but it already feels haunted. A place built around authority cannot survive long once authority is gone. Ōishi oversees the formal surrender of the domain. There is no dramatic last stand, no final battle under fluttering banners. Just paperwork, silence, and the slow dismantling of a world. To some of Asano's former retainers, this is unbearable. They want immediate vengeance, immediate purpose, immediate proof that loyalty still means something. But the reality is colder than emotion. Lord Kira is protected. He is politically connected, watched closely, and now fully aware that Asano's men may seek revenge. His mansion in Edo is guarded. His movements are careful. The shogunate itself is alert to any sign of disorder. A rash strike would fail. So Ōishi begins to do something almost theatrical. He disappears into ordinary life. At least, that is how it appears. Instead of preparing openly for revenge, he allows himself to be seen in Kyoto behaving in ways that scandalize other samurai. He drinks. He visits entertainment districts. He wanders in public with the air of a man who has abandoned discipline, perhaps even abandoned honor itself. People notice. They judge. Some despise him for it. One story, repeated for generations, tells of another samurai so disgusted by Ōishi's apparent decline that he insults him in the street and spits on him, believing he is looking at a broken man who has forgotten his lord. But this too may be part of the strategy, because the best disguise is not invisibility, it is disappointment. If Kira's spies are watching, and surely they are, what better report could they carry back than this? Ōishi is finished. The retainers are scattered. The threat has dissolved into drink, shame, and wasted grief. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension begins to fade. Months pass, then more. The city relaxes. The guards become less vigilant. And beneath that layer of apparent decay, messages continue to move quietly between former retainers. Not all at once, not carelessly, but enough. Enough to keep a promise alive. And while the world begins to forget Lord Asano, 47 men begin moving toward a night the rest of Edo will never forget. It is the 30th of January, 1703, or, by the old Japanese calendar, the 14th day of the 12th month. The night has turned bitterly cold over Edo. Snow lies across rooftops and courtyards in a pale, muffled layer that softens the city into something almost unreal. Lantern light glows faintly through paper windows. The canals and narrow streets are quiet. Even the dogs bark less in weather like this. Winter has a way of making everything feel farther away, as though the world itself has withdrawn behind the cold. And somewhere within that sleeping city, 47 men are preparing to become immortal, not because they seek glory, but because tonight, at last, they intend to finish what began in the corridor of Edo Castle nearly 2 years earlier. The Ronin gather in small groups so as not to draw attention. They are dressed not in ceremonial splendor, but for movement, for cold, for work. Some wear simple dark garments beneath cloaks. Some carry ladders, ropes, or tools, concealed as best they can. Their swords are real, but tonight they are not symbols. They are instruments. There is a difference. This is not the poetry of samurai. This is the labor of revenge. And still, before they move, there is order. Ōishi Kuranosuke gives final instructions with the steadiness of a man who has already accepted every possible ending. One group will attack from the front, another from the rear. The objective is simple in theory and terrifying in practice. Enter Lord Kira's mansion, overcome resistance, locate him and kill him. No confusion, no wandering, no unnecessary bloodshed. That last part matters, because this is not meant to be slaughter. It is meant to be justice, as they understand it. One detail often remembered in later retellings is that they bring a written notice to explain their actions in case neighbors or officials intervene. Even now, even on the edge of violence, they are still thinking about order, legitimacy, and how their actions will be seen by the world that survives them. That is what makes this story feel so distinctly Tokugawa. It is not rebellion. It is vengeance trying, almost impossibly, to remain disciplined. The men move through the snow in near silence. You can imagine the sound if you listen carefully enough. The faint crunch beneath sandals, the whisper of cloth, the small metallic shifts of weapons and gear, breath moving in and out behind the dark. No one speaks more than necessary. There are moments before an irreversible act when the world feels unnaturally precise. Every gate hinge, every lantern, every shadow on a wall seems to stand out with impossible clarity. Perhaps because once the first blow falls, detail will vanish into movement. And now, at last, they are close enough to see the walls of Lord Kira's estate rising from the snow. The waiting is over. What remains is action. And in a few moments, the silence of the winter night will be broken. There is a strange thing about violence. For so long, it exists only in imagination. A plan, a possibility, a thing rehearsed in whispers and mapped in the mind. And then, in a single instant, it becomes physical. Wood splinters, men shout, steel leaves its sheath, and there is no returning to the world that existed one breath earlier. The attack on Lord Kira's mansion begins quickly. One team forces entry at the front, while another moves from the rear just as planned. The Ronin strike with coordination born not from battlefield chaos, but from long preparation. They are not charging blindly. They are executing a design that has been held in place for nearly 2 years. The estate erupts awake. Guards stumble from sleep and confusion into immediate danger. Servants cry out. Doors are thrown open. Footsteps pound over wooden floors and through courtyards glazed with frost. Somewhere in the darkness, someone is trying to understand whether this is robbery, assassination, rebellion, or nightmare. It is, in a way, all of those things at once. The Ronin move room by room. This part of the story is often flattened in retellings, reduced to a heroic rush through the mansion. But the reality would have been more fragmented, more claustrophobic, narrow hallways, sudden resistance, sliding doors torn aside, lanterns swinging, shadows breaking apart across walls as men struggle in close quarters. The cold air outside gives way to the close, tense atmosphere of an occupied house. And inside such a place, even a small fight feels enormous. Some of Kira's retainers resist fiercely. Others are overwhelmed before they can properly organize. The Ronin have surprise, momentum, and purpose on their side. But purpose does not make a fight clean. There is confusion here, noise, the smell of lamp smoke and winter air and fear. Yet Ōishi's men remain remarkably disciplined. They call out warnings to nearby homes so neighbors will know this is not an attack on the district itself. They attempt to contain the conflict within Kira's estate. There is urgency, yes, but also control. This is not a mob surrendering to bloodlust. It is a targeted strike carried out by men who know the eyes of history are already upon them. And still, one problem emerges almost immediately. Lord Kira cannot be found. Room after room is searched. Storage spaces, sleeping quarters, private chambers, hidden corners of the estate where a man of status might flee when his walls have failed him. But Kira is not where he is expected to be. And with each passing moment, a terrible possibility grows heavier. What if they have come this far, waited this long, risked everything, only to discover that the one man they came for has escaped into the winter night? For a moment, after the first surge of movement, something unexpected happens. Not silence, but something close to it. Inside Lord Kira's mansion, the chaos does not spread endlessly. Instead, it compresses. It becomes contained within walls, corridors, and rooms that now feel smaller than they were meant to be. The shouting fades into pockets. The footsteps become directional. The violence, instead of expanding, begins to narrow. And that is when the real tension begins. Because the Ronin are no longer breaking in. They are searching, and searching is slower, more dangerous, more uncertain. Lanterns are lifted, doors slide open, tatami rooms are revealed one by one, each space holding the possibility of success or failure. You move with them now, carefully, deliberately, each step measured not by speed, but by awareness. There is a strange intimacy to moving through someone else's home at night. Objects that once belonged to a quiet, ordered life now feel like clues. A folded garment, a writing set, a disturbed cushion. Small signs that someone has moved recently or fled in haste. Every detail matters, because somewhere in this house, Lord Kira is hiding, or he is gone. And that uncertainty hangs heavier than the cold outside. Ōishi gives quiet instructions. Voices stay low. Groups split and regroup with purpose, not panic. This is where lesser plans would collapse. This is where discipline either holds or dissolves. Time begins to stretch. Minutes feel longer than they should, because every moment without finding Kira increases the risk. The longer they remain, the greater the chance that outside forces will arrive. Neighbors have already been alerted. Someone will carry word. Officials will wake. The city, no matter how deeply it sleeps, cannot ignore violence forever. And yet, they cannot leave, not without him. One of the men pauses in a narrow corridor. There is something here, not obvious, not loud, just wrong. A door slightly misaligned, a surface disturbed, the kind of detail you would ignore in daylight, but not tonight, never tonight. The door does not open easily. At first, it resists, not locked, just reluctant, as though whatever lies behind it has been pressed into stillness. Two men step forward. One holds the lantern. The other pushes, slowly, carefully. The wood gives way with a soft shift, and the space beyond reveals itself not as a proper room, but something smaller. A storage space, a hidden section, the kind of place not meant for guests, not meant for ceremony, but for concealment. The air inside is different, stale, undisturbed, and in the corner there is a man, curled, trying to make himself smaller than he is. For a brief moment, no one moves, because reality and expectation do not always align cleanly. This is not the image of a powerful official. This is not the composed authority of a man who once stood confidently inside Edo Castle. This is someone hiding, someone who understands completely what has come for him. The lantern light lifts slightly, enough to see his face, enough to confirm. It is him, Lord Kira Yoshinaka. There is no dramatic speech, no long declaration, only recognition, and something else, something quieter, because in that moment, the story that began with anger ends with clarity. Ōishi is called. He steps forward, looks down, and confirms what every man here has been waiting nearly 2 years to see. They have found him, and now everything that remains must happen exactly as it was always meant to. No more waiting, no more disguises, no more patience. Only the final act. For nearly 2 years, Lord Kira Yoshinaka has existed in this story as an idea, a name, a grievance, a memory sharpened by injustice. But now, in the lantern glow of a cramped hidden space inside his own mansion, he is no longer an idea at all. He is only a man. The room is tight and stale, the kind of place meant for objects, not for breathing fear. Dust rests undisturbed in the corners. Wooden beams press low above the crouched figure. The light trembles slightly in the hands of the men holding it, and with every small flicker, Kira's face seems to change, at one angle proud, at another frightened, and at another simply exhausted. The Ronins stand around the opening in controlled silence. This is the moment they imagined through every season of waiting, through every humiliation swallowed in public, through every whispered message, through every quiet night when they had to pretend their purpose was gone. And yet the reality of finally seeing him is stranger than vengeance had promised, because revenge in the mind is sharp and clean. Reality is softer, more human, more uncomfortable. Kira does not look like a villain from a painted screen. He looks old, exposed, cornered. A man who has run out of rooms in which to hide. Ōishi Kuranosuke is called forward. His steps are calm. There is no triumph in them, only completion. When he looks down at Kira, he is not looking at a random enemy. He's looking at the man whose survival turned Lord Asano's death into a wound that could not close. The man whose insult, arrogance or corruption, whatever the full truth may have been, set the whole tragedy in motion. The man who remained alive and protected while Asano died before sunset. And still, even now, Ōishi does not lose discipline. Kira is addressed formally. That matters. He's informed why they have come. He's given the dignity, however limited, of understanding that this is not chaos and not theft. This is retribution. This is the completion of duty as they understand duty. There is a kind of terrible elegance in that restraint, because they have not crossed half of Japan's emotional distance merely to become murderers in the dark. They have come to finish a moral argument with steel. And now that Kira has been found, the question is no longer whether he will die, only how. The Ronin do not kill Lord Kira immediately. That detail matters more than it may first seem. In another story, in a rougher world, They might have dragged him from hiding and cut him down where he crouched. It would have been faster, simpler, hotter with emotion. But that is not the shape of this moment. These men are samurai even now, even after disgrace, poverty, and years of pretending to be broken. And because they are samurai, they offer Kira something extraordinary, a choice. He is brought forward from the hidden space and confronted with the blade that once belonged to Lord Asano. The symbolism is unmistakable. The past has returned, not in memory, but in metal. Ōishi offers him the opportunity to die as a samurai, to commit seppuku, to meet death with at least a fragment of the honor that had been denied to others. It is, in its own severe way, an act of respect, not affection, not mercy, but respect for the code that still governs the world all of them inhabit. Even revenge, here, tries to remain inside the language of status and ritual. But Kira does not take the offer. Whether he is frozen by fear, overcome by age, unable to speak, or simply unwilling, the result is the same. He does not seize the blade. He does not kneel into ceremony. He does not reclaim the dignity being extended to him. He remains still. And with every passing second, the atmosphere in the room thickens. The men around Ōishi have waited too long for hesitation to stretch indefinitely. Outside, the winter night continues. Somewhere in the estate, wounded guards groan softly, and somewhere beyond the walls, Edo still sleeps in fragile ignorance. Time, which had once been the Ronin's greatest weapon, is now turning against them. Ōishi waits long enough for history to remember that the choice was offered, long enough for the moral balance of the act to be established. And then, when no answer comes, the final order is understood without needing to be spoken twice. Kira is executed. The blade falls not in rage, but in resolution. It is over quickly. Years of tension, silence, grief, and discipline narrow into one final act inside a cold room, lit by shaking lantern light. The man they came for is dead. The purpose that preserved them is complete. And yet the strange thing about fulfilled vengeance is that it does not create celebration. It creates stillness. Because when the purpose is gone, what remains is consequence. Once Lord Kira is dead, the energy inside the mansion changes at once, not because the danger is gone, but because purpose has been fulfilled. For nearly 2 years, every choice these men made bent toward this single outcome. Every disguise, every insult endured, every silent month of waiting existed to bring them to this room, to this cold winter night, to this stillness after the blade. And now that the task is complete, the air feels different, not lighter exactly, more settled, as though tension, having held its breath for years, has finally exhaled. The Ronin do not lose themselves in celebration. There are no cheers, no wild cries of triumph, no reckless release of emotion. Instead, they return at once to discipline. Lord Kira's head is taken carefully, wrapped for transport, and prepared as proof that the mission is done. To modern eyes, it can seem brutal, but in the world of samurai justice, proof matters. This was not a private quarrel ending in the dark. It was an act meant to be witnessed, judged, and understood. Their deed must not dissolve into rumor. It must be undeniable. The mansion is checked again. The wounded are counted. The dead are noted. The men gather themselves in the aftermath, moving through halls that only moments earlier had been full of struggle. Now the estate feels hollowed out, almost embarrassed in its silence. Torn sliding doors hang crooked. Lantern light falls across blood-darkened floors. Winter air drifts through broken entrances, cooling everything it touches. Outside, Neighbors and onlookers are beginning to understand that something extraordinary has taken place. This was not robbery, not a drunken brawl, not a sudden riot. It was the return of memory. Before leaving, the Ronin behave with remarkable order. They explain who they are and what they have done. This detail has always mattered to the endurance of the story. They do not flee like criminals trying to disappear into alleyways. They remain legible. They remain accountable. Even now, standing on the edge of punishment, they act as men who believe history should see them clearly. And when at last they step away from Kira's mansion into the freezing Edo night, carrying the proof of their vengeance through snow and darkness, they do not walk like men escaping. They walk like men proceeding toward the next part of their duty, because revenge was never the final chapter, only the one that had to come before surrender. The city is still half asleep when the Ronin begin their journey. Snow lies along the road in dull silver patches, and the cold before dawn has that peculiar heaviness that makes every sound seem separate from the world around it. Sandals press softly into slush and frost. Breath rises in pale clouds. The men move together in a formation that is neither hurried nor relaxed. They are not sneaking now. They are not hiding. In a sense, they are more visible than they have been in years. Their destination is not a fortress, not a ship, not a mountain refuge, not some hidden road out of Edo. They are going to Sengakuji, the temple where Lord Asano is buried. This too is essential, because revenge alone would be incomplete. Their lord must be told. Their duty must be laid before him in the only way still possible. The dead in this world are not absent. They remain part of obligation, memory, and moral order. And so, the Ronin carry Kira's head through the waking city, not as a trophy, but as an offering of completion. You can imagine the strange sight they make. 47 masterless samurai walking through winter streets after a night of bloodshed, composed and silent, as townspeople peer from doorways and windows, uncertain whether they are watching heroes, criminals, or ghosts from an older Japan. News begins to move ahead of them. It passes between servants, neighbors, watchmen, merchants opening their shutters to the day. The story is already escaping into the city. At Sengakuji, the men wash Kira's head and place it before Asano's grave. There is something almost unbearably quiet about that image. No battle music, no grand speech, only cold air, stone, incense, and the completion of a promise. For a moment, the whole story narrows again, not to the shogunate, not to politics, not to legal consequences, but to loyalty between the living and the dead. The men bow. They report, in effect, that what was left unfinished has now been finished. The wound has been answered. And then, when that act is done, they make perhaps the most important choice of all. They do not run. They do not scatter and hope sympathy will hide them. They prepare to surrender. Because in their eyes, duty has two parts: to avenge their lord, and then to accept the price. By morning, Edo is no longer the same city that went to sleep beneath the snow. The first people to understand that something extraordinary has happened are not officials, not scholars, not the powerful men who will soon debate law and order in heated private rooms. It is the ordinary people who know first. Servants carrying water, neighbors who heard the fighting from behind closed shutters, shopkeepers lifting their wooden fronts to the cold daylight, temple attendants, watchmen, stable hands, messengers. News moves quickly in a city like Edo, not in straight lines, but in waves. A whisper at one gate becomes certainty in the next street. A servant tells a merchant tells a customer, A customer tells a household, and before long, the whole city is breathing the same story. The Ronin did it. Lord Kira is dead. The men of Asano kept their promise. What makes the news so powerful is not merely the violence of it, but its shape. People in Edo understand rules. They live inside them every day. They understand rank, formality, obedience, and the peace imposed by the Tokugawa order. But they also understand loyalty. They understand insult. They understand the uneasy feeling that sometimes law and justice do not sit comfortably together. And that is why the city cannot react simply. These men have committed a grave crime. They have organized an armed attack, killed a high-ranking official, disturbed the peace of the capital. And yet, they have also done something that many quietly admire, something that feels older than regulation, older than bureaucracy, older even than the polished stillness of the shogun's peace. They have acted as samurai were supposed to act in an age when true samurai action had become increasingly ceremonial. In taverns, in kitchens, in back rooms and courtyards, people begin to argue. Were the Ronin reckless or righteous, criminals or models of loyalty? Did they threaten order or restore moral balance where the system had failed to do so? Even before officials make their judgment, the Ronin are already becoming something dangerous to governments and irresistible to memory. They are becoming symbols. And symbols are difficult things to punish cleanly. Because once a symbol enters the imagination of a city, law is no longer dealing only with bodies. It is dealing with meaning. By the time authorities begin formally processing the Ronin after their surrender, public sympathy is growing, quietly, widely, and in ways the shogunate cannot afford to ignore, because this is no longer just a legal case. It is a test of what kind of peace Tokugawa Japan truly believes in. For the shogunate, the 47 Ronin present a problem no sword can solve. If the matter was simple, judgment would already have been passed. Men who launch a deadly raid in the capital are criminals. The peace of the realm must be protected. Punishment must be swift. The matter ends there. But this matter does not end there, because the Ronin did not behave like common killers. They did not strike for profit or faction or private gain. They did not flee into hiding. They did not deny what they had done. They went to their lord's grave. They surrendered themselves. They acted from beginning to end, like men who knew punishment was coming and accepted it as part of their duty. That changes everything. High officials now face a dilemma more dangerous than the raid itself. If they punish the Ronin too harshly, they risk appearing blind to loyalty, blind to samurai values, blind to the moral emotion that has already begun to spread through Edo. If they forgive them entirely, they risk something else just as serious, the erosion of law. Others might decide that private revenge can be justified whenever official justice feels unsatisfying. A state built on order cannot casually permit vengeance, but a warrior government cannot casually condemn loyalty either. And so, the Ronin wait in custody while debate unfolds above them. They are placed in the residences of sympathetic daimyo, treated not like ordinary criminals in chains, but like men suspended between disgrace and honor. Even this detail reveals how unusual their case has become. Everyone understands that a decision here will echo far beyond the 47 themselves. Scholars argue, officials deliberate, domains watch carefully. The question beneath all the legal language is simple enough to state, though not to answer. What should happen when men break the law in order to fulfill the deepest expectations of their class? Tokugawa Japan prides itself on peace, stability, and hierarchy, but peace has changed the samurai. Many now serve with pens instead of spears, with ceremony instead of war. The Ronin, by contrast, seem to have stepped out of an older imagination, one in which service to a lord could still demand everything, even years after his death. That is part of why the public cannot look away. The Ronin do not merely challenge the law, they expose a contradiction at the heart of the age. The government wants samurai loyalty, but not necessarily samurai vengeance. It wants honor, but contained, feeling, but disciplined, devotion, but never disruptive. And now 47 men have forced the state to answer whether such balance is truly possible. Soon, judgment will come. And when it does, it will try to do something almost impossible. Punish the Ronin, without dishonoring them. The decision does not come quickly. Days pass, then more. And throughout that time, the tension in Edo does not disappear. It settles, like snow that refuses to melt. People continue their routines, but beneath those routines, the question remains. What will the shogunate do? At last, the answer arrives. The Ronin are to die, but not as criminals, not by public execution, not in disgrace, not as examples of disorder crushed by authority. They are granted the right to commit seppuku, ritual suicide. In the language of Tokugawa law, this is a compromise so precise, it almost feels like a work of philosophy. The state acknowledges that the Ronin have broken the law. The peace of the capital has been violated. Authority must be maintained. There can be no precedent for organized vengeance. And yet, the state also acknowledges something else, that these men acted according to a code older than bureaucracy, that their loyalty, however disruptive, cannot be treated as mere criminality, that to strip them entirely of honor would create a different kind of instability, one rooted not in violence, but in moral resentment. So the judgment does two things at once. It condemns them, and it honors them. The Ronin receive the news without resistance. There is no outcry, no pleading, no attempt to escape a fate they had already accepted long before they entered Kira's mansion. Because this was always part of the story. From the moment they chose to act, they also chose this ending. In a way, the verdict does not surprise them. It completes them. They are divided into small groups and assigned to the residences of different daimyo, where they will carry out the final ritual. Each location prepares in quiet order. Mats are arranged. Witnesses are selected. The structure of the act is already known. It does not need to be explained. Outside, the city absorbs the decision with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. This is perhaps the only ending that could hold both law and loyalty in the same space. And yet, even knowing this, something about it feels heavy, because everyone understands what is about to happen. 47 men will die, not because they failed, but because they succeeded. On the night before their deaths, the Ronin are not treated as condemned men in chains. They are treated as samurai. Each is given the space and dignity required for what is to come. There are no shouting guards, no iron bars, no sense of panic. The atmosphere is calm, almost reflective, as though the entire world has agreed to lower its voice. You can imagine one of them sitting quietly now, a small room, a low table, paper laid before him, ink prepared. The sounds of the household beyond the walls muted by distance and respect. This is where he writes his death poem. A final expression, a last attempt to shape something meaningful out of the closing of a life. In samurai culture, the death poem is not an afterthought. It is a distillation, a moment in which a person confronts impermanence directly and leaves behind a trace of how they understood it. Some poems are simple, some are elegant, some are almost painfully restrained. All of them carry the quiet knowledge that there will be no revision. Around the city, in different residences, the other Ronin are doing the same, writing, reflecting, remembering, perhaps thinking back to the years before all of this began, to service under Lord Asano, to the structure of a life that once felt stable, to the moment in the corridor of Edo Castle when everything changed. Or perhaps they are not thinking of the past at all. Perhaps they are simply present, because when the future has narrowed to a single act, the mind sometimes becomes very clear. There is no longer anything to plan, nothing to protect, nothing to delay. Only the final gesture remains. And strangely, there is a kind of peace in that. Not happiness, not relief, but completion. Outside, Edo settles into another winter night. The same city that whispered their story, debated their meaning, and watched their judgment now grows quiet again. Snow may fall, or perhaps it does not. The details of the weather matter less now. What matters is the stillness, because by morning, the Ronin will be gone. Morning arrives with a stillness that feels almost ceremonial. There is no rush in it, no panic, no confusion, no scrambling to prevent what is about to happen. Everything has already been decided. Inside the residences where the Ronin are being held, preparations begin with the calm efficiency that so often accompanies the most irreversible moments in history. Tatami rooms are arranged. Witnesses take their places. Attendants move carefully and speak softly. The architecture of ritual begins to close around the men one final time. Each Ronin will die separately, but the meaning of the act is shared. This is not execution in the ordinary sense. It is self-inflicted death under command, shaped by ceremony, dignity, and unbearable control. The state has chosen this form precisely because it allows punishment and honor to coexist. To modernize, that coexistence may feel difficult to understand, but in Tokugawa Japan, form matters, method matters. The way a person dies can alter the meaning of everything that came before. One by one, the men prepare themselves. White garments, measured breathing, a final bow, a final kneeling posture. Some may have been afraid. Of course they were. History often smooths fear out of these moments and leaves only composure behind. But fear belongs here too. Bodies resist endings. Hands tremble. Hearts beat harder than they should. Even the most disciplined mind must feel the weight of what is coming when steel is placed so near the body. And yet, despite whatever private terror may have existed beneath the surface, the ritual proceeds. A blade, a cut, then the swift intervention of a second to end suffering before it can become disorder. It happens again, and again, and again. Across different houses, throughout the day, the Ronin complete the last duty required of them. By sunset, most or all are dead. It is difficult to imagine such a day clearly, because the scale of it feels almost impossible. 46 men dying in ritual succession, each death both deeply personal and entirely public in meaning. The body of the 47th, one who had been sent ahead earlier with news and later spared in some versions of the tradition, would become part of the broader legend in more complicated ways, but in the shape of the story remembered by most. The brotherhood has now reached its end. No swords remain to be drawn. No disguises remain to be worn. No waiting remains to be endured. Only memory. And memory, as it turns out, can be far more difficult to bury than a body. The Ronin are dead. And yet, in another sense, this is the exact moment they become impossible to kill. Because once the bodies are gone, the story begins to loosen itself from ordinary history and enter something larger. It enters memory, then admiration, then repetition, then myth. Their graves are placed at Sengakuji beside Lord Asano. and almost immediately people begin to visit. Not just relatives or retainers. Ordinary townspeople come too. They come to look, to bow, to wonder, to stand near the place where loyalty and death have been arranged into something almost sacred. Flowers appear, incense burns. The site becomes quiet, but never empty. And from there, the transformation accelerates. The Ronin are discussed in homes, retold in streets, remembered in private conversation and public fascination. Their story moves through the culture not because it is simple, but because it contains a tension people cannot stop turning over in their minds. Were they wrong? Yes, by the law. Were they right? Also yes, in the moral imagination of many who heard what they had done. That contradiction is exactly what gives the story its staying power. If the Ronin had merely been criminals, history would have filed them away and moved on. If they had merely been heroes, the story would have become flatter, easier, less human. But because they remain suspended between order and righteousness, obedience and rebellion, they continue to feel alive. Playwrights will retell the story. Writers will reshape it. Audiences will return to it generation after generation. Names may shift, details may blur, political sensitivities may force disguise in some eras, but the emotional core survives. A lord is wronged. His men wait, they return, they complete their duty, and then they accept death. There is something almost mathematically satisfying about that shape, and perhaps that is why it endures, because beneath all the ritual and snow and steel, the story offers something people have always longed for in a confusing world, a sense that loyalty, once chosen fully, can still give a human life a clean and final meaning. One of the strangest things about history is that events do not end when they are over. They continue, not in the world of action, but in the world of retelling. And the story of the 47 Ronin may be one of the clearest examples of that transformation anywhere in the world. Because what happened in 1701 to 1703 was real. Lord Asano was real. Lord Kira was real. Ōishi Kuranosuke was real. The raid happened. The surrender happened. The deaths happened. But the version of the story most people remember today is not built from records alone. It is built from memory polished by generations. In the years that followed, the Akō Incident did not remain safely contained inside legal documents or temple records. It spilled outward into popular culture, and once a story enters popular culture, it begins to change, not always by becoming false, but by becoming emotionally sharper, more symbolic, more perfectly arranged than life usually allows itself to be. Some details become cleaner. Some motives become nobler. Some personalities become easier to admire or easier to despise. And because the shogunate was often uncomfortable with directly celebrating an act of revenge against official authority, later dramatizations sometimes disguised names and settings. The most famous example would eventually become Kanadehon Chushingura, a retelling so influential that for many people it became almost inseparable from the historical event itself. This is what stories do when they survive long enough. They gather layers. A legal case becomes a moral lesson. A moral lesson becomes theatre. Theatre becomes identity. And identity becomes something future generations inherit before they even realize they have inherited it. That does not mean the real event disappears. If anything, it becomes more haunting. Because behind every polished retelling still lies the original texture of the thing itself. Cold corridors, hidden rooms, snow in Edo, the silence before violence, the strange discipline of men who had already chosen death long before the state formally gave it to them. Perhaps that is why the story remains so compelling, even after centuries of adaptation. it still feels reachable. Not because we understand samurai life perfectly, but because we understand what it means when a story refuses to stay in the past. And the 47 Ronin have refused to stay in the past for more than 300 years. If you stand back from the story now, after all the snow and waiting and blood and ritual, what remains is not merely a famous act of revenge. What remains is a question, a quiet one, but a heavy one. How far should loyalty go? That is the question the Ronin leave behind like a blade resting on a mat after the room is emptied. Because on one level, their story is beautiful in its clarity. They served a lord. He died dishonored. They waited, avenged him, and accepted the consequences. There is almost nothing messy in that structure once it is told from a distance. It has the severe elegance of a carved object. Every part seems to fit. But human beings do not actually live from a distance. They live inside consequences. And once you return the story to human scale, it becomes more difficult. These men gave away their futures, their names, their bodies, whatever ordinary peace might still have been possible. They gave all of it to a dead man. There is something noble in that, and also something frightening, because loyalty, pushed far enough, becomes a force that can eclipse the self entirely. It can make sacrifice feel cleaner than survival. It can make death feel simpler than compromise. It can make a person's value inseparable from obedience to a bond no one else can fully see. That is part of why the Ronin continue to disturb as much as they inspire. They are not merely examples of virtue. They are examples of totality, and totality is never comfortable. The Tokugawa state understood this, even if it could not say so openly. That is why the Ronin had to die, not only because they broke the law, but because they represented a form of loyalty too powerful to leave unchecked. A government can admire that kind of devotion in theory, but in practice, it is dangerous. It belongs to an older, more combustible world, and yet people continue to visit their graves, continue to tell the story, continue to feel the pull of it, because beneath all the questions and contradictions, there is something deeply human in the idea that a life might be made meaningful by unwavering devotion to something larger than comfort, safety, or even survival. Whether that idea is wise is another matter entirely. If you were to arrive at Sengakuji in the early morning, before the crowds and incense and footsteps of later visitors, you might understand the story differently, not as spectacle, not as legend, not even as history in the way we usually mean it, but as stillness. Because graves have a way of stripping stories back down to what remains when performance has ended. Stone, names, silence, and the strange awareness that all human intensity, no matter how dramatic while it is happening, eventually becomes quiet enough for moss to grow over. The graves of the Ronin stand together near Lord Asano's, and that arrangement alone says more than many books. They are still in death, where they believed they belonged, in service, in proximity, in completion. The hierarchy that shaped their lives has followed them into the earth. Visitors have come here for centuries, some out of admiration, some out of curiosity, some perhaps because they are unsure what they feel and want to stand near the place long enough to find out. And maybe that is the most honest response to the story, uncertainty. Not because the events are unclear, but because clarity of action does not always produce clarity of meaning. The Ronin did what they believed they had to do. They did it with discipline. They accepted the cost. There is greatness in that, and there is tragedy in that too. Because once you strip away the theatre and symbolism, what remains is still 47 lives narrowed into one final purpose. 47 men who might have become old, obscure, and ordinary instead, choosing to become unforgettable for only a very short time. Most people in history are forgotten. These men were not. But memory is not the same thing as peace. And standing here before the graves in the pale quiet of morning, that difference feels almost visible. The story survived, the men did not. And perhaps that is why the place feels so calm. Because all stories, no matter how sharp they once were, eventually come to rest in silence. There is one final thing worth noticing before we leave old Japan behind. The Ronin did not live in a world that promised happiness. That may sound obvious, but it matters. Modern people are often taught, quietly or directly, that the purpose of life is comfort, self-expression, fulfillment, safety, or at the very least, some version of personal peace. Even when we fail to achieve those things, we still tend to imagine that we were supposed to. The samurai world was built differently. It was not centered around happiness. It was centered around duty. And duty, by its nature, asks a very different question. Not, what do I want from life? But, what is required of me? That question can produce astonishing discipline. It can also produce immense suffering. And the 47 Ronin, perhaps more than almost any other famous samurai story, stand at the exact point where those two truths meet. Because they understood something many people spend their entire lives trying to avoid, that meaning and comfort are not always allies. Sometimes they move in opposite directions. Sometimes the thing that gives a life its shape is also the thing that destroys its ease. The Ronin could have chosen survival, a quieter life, a more practical future, and perhaps, by modern standards, they should have. But that was not the world they inhabited, and it was not the language through which they understood themselves. To them, identity was not something endlessly reinvented. It was something proven, through conduct, through endurance, through willingness. And once that framework is understood, the story becomes less exotic and more unsettlingly clear. Because the Ronin were not simply trapped by their culture, they were also completed by it. That is what gives the story its weight even now. Not merely that they died for loyalty, but that they seem to have believed, with a calm many of us no longer recognize, that a life without fulfilled duty would have been a lesser kind of death. And now, at last, the city grows quiet again. The lanterns dim, the gates close, the courtyards gather frost, and somewhere beyond the reach of memory, old Edo disappears beneath another winter night. If you listen carefully, you can almost imagine the story beginning again. The crunch of sandals in snow, the breath of waiting men, the hush before a gate breaks, the creak of wooden halls, the lantern lifted toward a hidden room, the soft wind moving through the grounds of a temple where incense burns in the cold. Perhaps that is why this story has never truly faded, because it feels like something still happening just beyond the edge of sleep, not in the literal sense, but in the emotional one. A world where honor can still shape fate, where memory can still demand action, where duty can still outweigh survival, where the dead are not gone if the living still carry them forward. And yet, as powerful as all of that may sound, the deepest truth of the story may be something quieter. Even the most disciplined lives end in stillness. Even the fiercest loyalty becomes silence. Even the sharpest steel is eventually put down. In the end, all human stories, whether they unfold in castles, battlefields, temples, trenches, taverns, or winter streets, pass into the same final condition: quiet. And maybe that is why history can be such a strange comfort at night, because it reminds us that countless lives once filled with urgency and fear and purpose, have already come and gone beneath the same moon that hangs above us now. Their struggles were real, their choices were costly, their world felt immediate to them, and yet now it is only snowfall, only distance, only story. So tonight, as old Japan fades into darkness and the footsteps of the Ronin disappear into the cold, you can let the silence return. The waiting is over, the gate has opened, the story has been told, and the snow keeps falling. And that is where we'll leave the 47 Ronin tonight. In the snow, in the silence, and in that strange place between history and legend, where some stories seem too disciplined, too tragic, and too human to ever fully disappear. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of the samurai, and you'd like more slow, immersive history to fall asleep to, then feel free to like the video and subscribe to The Sleeping Historian. And if you're still awake, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. For now, though, get comfortable, let the room grow quieter, and let history drift softly into the dark. Good night.